streaming. Well, good morning. We're running just a couple minutes late this morning, but good to be here to continue our Bible study this morning. We're going to continue studying in the prophecies of Jesus and their fulfillments. Thankful for everybody that's watching on the live stream. It's a little bit different preaching and teaching to a empty auditorium, and so we look forward to the time that we could all get back together and during Bible class and do some study and have some discussions together. So, but we'll make do for the time being. Before we get started this morning, let's have a word of prayer. Dear most kind, gracious Father in heaven, so grateful for this beautiful Lord's Day that you bless us with, Father. Grateful for the opportunity that we have to assemble together and worship you, Father, here shortly. And thankful for that. Thankful for the freedom we have to do so. And pray that we'll never take this blessing for granted, Father, and that we'll always be mindful of all the blessings that you've given us. And we're especially mindful for the blessing of your Son and His sacrifice for us. And pray you'll forgive us for any sins that are missed in our life, Father. Know that we're human and we sin each day, and just pray for your continued blessings upon us, everything we do, and pray for your blessings upon the church here at Valdosta, and for the good that it does, Father. Pray that you'll continue to be with Adam and as he works here with us, and the elders, Father, and just pray that they'll guide us in a way that's pleasing to you, and just pray that the work here at Valdosta can continue for many years to come. And I know there's many sick that we're mindful of, and just want to pray for them, Father, and pray for your blessings upon them. And pray that you'll be with us as we go into this Bible study this morning, Father. Help us to study your word with open minds and open hearts, and that we can learn from your word, Father. And so grateful that we have your inspired word and the Bible as we do today, Father. And pray that we'll always take the opportunity to study it and to learn from it as much as we can. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. So we're going to continue our study about the prophecies and fulfillments of Jesus. Now I can't click again. Just click this. Just click one slide.
Now do it. You got it.
There we go. This is lesson 3. So just to kind of recap what we did on lessons 1 and 2. We looked at how Jesus was the seed of a woman in lesson 1. And then last week we looked at how Jesus was the seed of Abraham, the promised seed of Abraham. So this week, or this morning, we'll be able to move a little bit faster. We'll be able to get through two lessons this morning, mostly because we spent quite a bit of time on the promised seed of Abraham last week. So our first lesson is the promised seed of Isaac, so it's going to be very similar to the promised seed of Abraham. We'll be able to move through a couple this morning. But let's first look at our first one here, the promised seed of Isaac. Our prophecy verse here is Genesis chapter 17 and verse 19. It says, "And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him." So, like I said, last week we spent quite a bit of time studying how Jesus was the promised seed of Abraham. We looked at how God had promised that all the nations of the earth would be blessed through Abraham's seeds and through his seed and through his descendants. And we showed how this was because Jesus would die for us. We know that Jesus was of the lineage of Abraham, and that eventually Jesus would be born of the lineage of Abraham. And then, of course, he would continue through his life and his ministry, and then ultimately die for us, for our sins. And that all of the nations of the earth would be blessed through his sacrifice. So Genesis chapter 17, verse 19 here, where it talks about the promised seed of Isaac, is very similar to God's promise to Abraham, in that he is establishing the same covenant with Isaac that he established with Abraham, his father. So God says that he not only establishes His covenant with Isaac, but He establishes an everlasting covenant with Isaac's seed. God establishes His covenant with Isaac here in Genesis chapter 17, but Isaac isn't even born until Genesis chapter 21. So I think that's interesting that that God has established His covenant with Abraham's son before Abraham's son was even born. I think this exemplifies the faithfulness of God. So we know that God had promised to give Abraham a son, and of course we know, as we have the Bible delivered to us today, but maybe from Abraham's perspective, we know that God had promised to give him a son, and it was a really long period of time between when he got the first promise and before he actually had a son. But God makes His covenant with Isaac here in Genesis chapter 17, before Isaac is even born in Genesis chapter 21. So this shows God's faithfulness to His promises and to His covenant. So God knew that when the right time had come that Isaac would be born, He would continue His covenant with Isaac just like He did Abraham, and on through Isaac's seed as well. So it shows the faithfulness of God, I believe, that He establishes His covenant with Isaac before he's even born. So let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 7. Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 9 says, "Know therefore that the Lord thy God, He is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love Him and keep His commandments." And then Psalm chapter 89 and verse 1 says, "I will sing of the mercies of the Lord forever. With my mouth will I make known thy faithfulness to all generations." So God is a faithful God, definitely. We understand that that it's impossible for God to lie. When He makes a promise or He makes a covenant, He keeps that promise. But I thought this was a good example of God's faithfulness to us and to His followers. So we see here in Genesis chapter 17 that Jesus is the promised seed of Isaac, because God establishes His covenant with Isaac like He did Abraham. And also we can see in Matthew chapter 1, verse 2, that this prophecy is fulfilled because, again, if we look at the genealogies of Jesus, Matthew chapter 1, verse 2 says, "Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judas and his brethren." So we see the seed of Abraham there as he begat Isaac. And then in Luke chapter 3, verse 34, which was the son of Jacob, which was the son of Isaac, which was the son of Abraham. So again, we have the genealogies of Jesus showing that He came from the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and on down the line. So, as I said from the outset, the promised seed of Isaac was very similar to the promised seed of Abraham, so I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of time reviewing that, because we spent quite a bit of time last week. But we can see that Jesus is the promised seed of Isaac. We can also see that Jesus is the promised seed of Jacob. And there are a few differences here between what we can draw from our study of the promised seed of Jacob. So we'll spend a little bit the rest of our time this morning talking about Jesus as the promised seed of Jacob, because there's some good points here we can bring out. I think we can learn from. So let's look in the prophecy here, Numbers chapter 24, in verse 17. It says, "I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth." So there's quite a bit going on in this verse, and it's easy at first glance to not really grasp all that's going on here, right? There's a lot being said, and it's not necessarily easily understood just from reading this verse what's being talked about. But I think that it's helpful to understand that, like a lot of Bible passages, I think that we can get a simpler physical meaning and then a deeper spiritual meaning from this verse. So that's what we're going to look at. It's probably beneficial to go back to Numbers chapter 24. Now let's just review the context a little bit. So we're in verse 17. If you go back to the preceding chapters, chapter 23, chapter 22, and on back, we'll see what's going on. So the children of Israel had settled here in Moab, and if you look at chapter 22, verse 1, the children of Israel set forward and pitched in the plains of Moab on this side, Jordan by Jericho. Verse 2, and Balak the son of Zippor saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was sore afraid of the people because they were many, and Moab was distressed because of the children of Israel. So Balak, the king of Moab, is scared because Israel has settled or pitched their tent in Moab. Just like we understood, we saw how in the land of Egypt, Egypt being a mighty nation was scared of the children of Israel because of the number of the people. God had promised to make Israel a great nation, and the sheer multitudes of the Israelites in Egypt scared the Pharaoh, and that's why he brought them into slavery. And here you've got the king of Moab seeing the great numbers of people as well, and he's afraid. He's afraid that they can take over his country. He's seen what they've done to some of the other countries. So Balak sends for Balaam, and we probably don't have time necessarily to read the entire context because it's a couple chapters. But basically, Balak sends to Balaam, asking him to come. He wants help in driving the children of Israel out. Balaam basically says, I can't do this because God has told me that I can't. Balak keeps beckoning Balaam, so Balaam finally comes to Moab. There's 3 or 4 rounds of sacrifices that he offers, and each time God tells Balaam to bless the children of Israel instead of cursing the children of Israel. Balak wants Balaam to curse the children of Israel, but God won't allow him to. He tells him to bless them every time. So there's 3 or 4 rounds of sacrifices. We get into chapter number 24, and then if we look at verse number 10, and Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he smote his hands together. And Balak said unto Balaam, I called thee to curse mine enemies, and behold, thou hast altogether blessed them these 3 times. Now therefore flee thou to thy place. I thought to promote thee into great honor, but lo, the Lord hath kept thee back from honor. So then you get down to in verse number 17, where you see this prophecy that Balaam is telling Balak, where he says, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. So like I said, I think it's helpful if we keep in mind that I think we can really see 2 meanings here, a simpler physical meaning and then a deeper spiritual meaning. I think we can see this in 2 individuals that are exemplified by this verse. The first would be David. David would exemplify a physical fulfilling of this verse, and I think Jesus would exemplify the spiritual fulfillment of this verse. So let's look at the first part. It says, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. Nigh could mean near. So I shall behold him, but not near. So remember that Balaam and Balak are standing on basically tall mountains overlooking the children of Israel. So Israel is camped out below, and Balak has brought Balaam and these others to these high mountains and to view the children of Israel, and he wants them to curse them from here. So they're standing on this mountain. They're viewing the children of Israel. So we have to remember when it says, "I shall see them, but not now, and I shall behold him, but not near." It can't be talking about the children of Israel, because they can see them now, and they're relatively near to where they are. They may not be, they're not in the camp with them, but they can see them from where they're standing. So they're in relative proximity to the children of Israel. So we know this can't be talking about events as of right now. The first part tells us that the one who Balaam is referring to is not here in the present, but he will be in the future. So I think both David and Christ can fit this description because they will both be sometime in the future after this event. Next it says, "There shall come a star out of Jacob." I think this is a clear reference to Christ. If you go to Revelation chapter 22 and verse 16, this is Jesus speaking. He says, "I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root of the offspring of David and the bright and morning star." So here Jesus refers to himself as the morning star, and he also references his lineage to David, which would also, by implication, refer to his lineage from Jacob. We know that David came from Jacob as well. So this seems to fit with the description here in Numbers chapter 24 and verse 17, with Jesus being the star of Jacob. We know that Jacob, either the name Jacob or the name Israel, is sometimes used interchangeably to refer to the children of Israel. So the star of which says a star shall come out of Jacob, is referring to the nation of Israel, Jacob's descendants. So I think that this fits well with the passage here in Numbers. Jesus refers to himself as the morning star. So Jesus here is the star that shall come out of Jacob. It also says, "And a scepter shall rise out of Israel." I think this is a reference to King David. Normally when we think of a scepter, the idea of a scepter carries the idea of a king or the idea of royalty, somebody like a king and that sort of role. It seems to me that this is more of a physical description, whereas a star is not necessarily something that you can hold. It's something that we can see them, but there's a little bit more of a physical representation, I would think, because of a scepter, because it's something that you can hold, and it's maybe a king sits on his throne and holds his scepter. So I think that sort of represents more so David as his physical kingdom. Jesus is certainly a king. Obviously, Jesus is a king as well, and the idea of a scepter would fit him as well in his spiritual kingdom. And we have references of Jesus holding a scepter in Revelation. But as far as a contrast here and a comparison between the two in this context, I think that it fits for Jesus to be the star and David to be the scepter. And I think it also makes sense because you've got sort of implication of two individuals. One is a star and one is a scepter. Seems to be two distinct individuals, but they share a similarity in the context. So we know that David can be said to be a type of Christ, and here we can view David as a type of Christ in that David is more of a physical representation of Jesus' spiritual representation. That's we'll get into that a little bit deeper as we move through here. So it seems that a physical David is used to help show a spiritual Christ. Next it says, "And shall smite the corners of Moab." So remember here that Balak is the king of Moab, right? So here in this words would obviously trouble him quite a bit, I would imagine, him being the king. He's already upset that the children of Israel are in his land. He's worried because of the great numbers that they have, that they could attack him or they could take over his nation. So I would think that phrase would obviously trouble him quite a bit, but Balaam has told him at the outset that basically this is not happening now, right? Where he says, "I shall see him, but not now, and I shall behold him, but not near." So we know that the Moabites will be smitten, but it's not going to be today per se. So we can look, if we go back to 2 Samuel chapter 8, we can read about David's conquest here. In 2 Samuel chapter 8, we'll read the first couple of verses. And after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them, and David took Bethekemah out of the hand of the Philistines, and he smote Moab, and measured them with a line, casting them down to the ground. Even with 2 lines measured he to put to death, and with 1 full line to keep alive. And so the Moabites became servants and brought gifts. So we have the account here of David actually conquering the Moabites. It says, if you remember what Balaam said, he said he shall smite the corners of Moab. You think about, what does it mean to smite the corners of Moab? I would think that would imply that maybe completely taking them over, completely smiting the nation. If you look at what David did here in 2 Samuel chapter 8, he divided them in 2, and then the rest he's got here says the Moabites became David's servants. So I think that David definitely physically fulfilled the smiting of the Moabites here in 2 Samuel chapter 8. So David, as the Scepter in Numbers chapter 24, physically fulfilled the smiting of the Moabites, as we can see. The last part of this verse says, and destroy all the children of Sheth. So the meaning of who exactly or what exactly Sheth isn't well understood. Some scholars think that it might refer to specific nations, that the name Sheth refers to specific nations. And then others take it as more of a general term, meaning enemies per se. So I did find that the Interlinear Bible, which is more of a literal translation of the Bible, it refers to, instead of saying children of Sheth, it says children of tumult. A tumult would be maybe an uprising or a riot or a disagreement or something of that nature. So I think we could say that the children of tumult could be would fit that description of enemies, or it would fit that description of maybe troublemakers, somebody that's causing trouble with you or your people. But I think it's safe to say that this refers to opposition of some kind of opposition. It's referring to the victory over an enemy. I think we can see that. So we just saw how David defeated the Moabites. If we look at the rest of 2 Samuel chapter 8, we can see that there was many other military victories that David did. He conquered quite a bit, and you can see that his fame had spread across the world. So we can, if we look at it from a physical standpoint, David definitely had victories over those that would be called enemies, or maybe the children of tumult, those that would be in opposition to him. So David had a lot of physical victories. We can read of his mighty victories in the Bible in the Old Testament, and again through 2 Samuel chapter 8. So David fulfilled these victories physically, whereas we can say, or it could be said, that Jesus fulfilled these victories spiritually. Whereas David had a lot of physical victories. He had some very mighty wins, militarily and physically. Jesus had some very mighty wins spiritually. And we can see that Jesus has conquered his spiritual enemies. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. So we looked at this verse quite a bit in our first lesson about Jesus being the seed of a woman. This is in the Garden of Eden. After after the devil has seduced Eve into taking of the fruit, when God is punishing all of them together, He says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So we talked quite a bit about how this is a reference to Jesus, what we would normally call the first prophecy of Jesus. We see that Satan shall bruise Jesus' heel, meaning that Jesus will have a temporary injury, but Jesus will bruise Satan's head, meaning that it will be an injury or that he will never recover from. So ultimately, even from Genesis chapter 3, we have ultimately Jesus will defeat Satan. If we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 24, it says, Then cometh the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall have put down all rule and all authority. So the time is coming where Jesus will have the ultimate victory. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14 tells us that, For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil. And then 1 John chapter 3 and verse 8 says, He that committeth sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. So here we have these two verses telling us Jesus is going to destroy the devil. He's going to destroy the works of the devil. He's going to have that ultimate victory over the devil. So David was a great conqueror, but there was always someone for a physical king to fight. So if you think about, if you're a king of a nation or of a country, or even just read through the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, there's always somebody to fight, right? There's always a nation that is either looking to invade you, or you're having to constantly fight off people. So there's, as far as from a physical standpoint, there's always somebody to fight. There's always some battle to fight, and there's always somebody that you have to defend yourself from. So David was a mighty king, and he had a lot of victories. But as a physical king, David never could have that ultimate victory where he beat everybody, basically, right? There's always somebody to fight from a physical standpoint. So Jesus is the ultimate conqueror because He conquered our greatest enemy, and he did that once. So we know that once Jesus conquered Satan, He conquered him once and for all. Once Jesus died for us, His sacrifice conquered the power of Satan once and for all and forever. He never has to do it again. He offered Himself, and that was the ultimate. He conquered Satan ultimately and forever through that one act. So we can see Jesus as the ultimate conqueror because He did it once and He was done. Satan will never need to be conquered again because Jesus conquered him forever. So we have shown that Jesus is the star that will come out of Jacob. So this prophecy refers to Jesus as the seed of Jacob, just like He was the seed of Abraham and the seed of Isaac. The other verse we have up here for the prophecy is Genesis chapter 28. So we're quickly running out of time. Let's turn over to Genesis chapter 28. Let's read verse 14 first. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So this is God talking to Jacob. If we go back and look earlier here in chapter 28, at verse number 5, and Isaac sent away Jacob, and he went to Padanaram unto Laban, son of Bethuel the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. So Jacob is sent away unto his uncle Laban, and we know we've heard this lesson quite a bit. He ultimately gets a wife and goes through all the things that he goes through there with Laban. But Jacob is sent away here in this chapter unto his uncle Laban. In verse number 10, let's look at verse number 10, 11. Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows, and lay down in that place to sleep. So he's traveling, and he stopped for the night to rest here. We see starting in verse number 12, that Jacob had a dream. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And then again in verse 14, and thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Jacob dreams this dream of the angels ascending and descending from heaven. He sees a vision of God, and God tells him what he's going to do. He makes a promise to Jacob that's, again, very similar to the promise that he made to Abraham. So again, we see God's faithfulness, that he made a promise to Abraham and to Abraham's seed, and now we see it, through Isaac and Jacob. But God tells Jacob that the land that you're on, I'm going to give to thee. He promises to give Jacob and his descendants the land, and he also promises that through Jacob's seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. So again, we spent a lot of time last week showing how that the nations of the earth shall be blessed through Abraham's seed, because Jesus will come through the lineage of Abraham. So the same is true for Jacob. We see that that Jesus will come through the lineage of Jacob, because Jacob's of the lineage of Abraham as well. So God makes the same promise to Jacob, that all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Jesus, the Messiah, will come through your descendants. So we now see this blessing is Christ, who will come into the world through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's seed. Again, if we go to the fulfillment of this, we talk about Jesus being the seed of Jacob. We can look again in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 2, and then Luke chapter 3 and verse 34. We see the genealogies of Jesus again, and see that he was actually born of the lineage that God said he would be. I think it's kind of amazing, quite interesting, that we've used these same verses for several weeks here to show the fulfillment and the fulfillment of these prophecies. We spent a lot of time on the prophecies and what they're saying, and then to see the fulfillment of them, all you have to do is go to the same verses in the Gospels that show the genealogy of Jesus. Sometimes we probably might overlook the genealogy portion of the New Testament, because they're sort of repetitive, and maybe we don't feel like they're as useful as other parts of the New Testament. Just because it doesn't seem that there's a whole lot sometimes that we could gain from them, because it's just, so and so begat so and so, and all that, and on down the line. And maybe sometimes we don't, we tend to overlook what messages we can get from these verses, because we look more to other verses that maybe we feel is more important per se. But I think it's amazing that just these few verses have given us the fulfillment of all the prophecies that we've looked at up to this point in our study. So it just goes to show that all of God's Word is inspired, and there's always something that we can gain from every word, right? There's no word, there's no verse in the Bible that was written that something can't be gained from. And I think we can see that from this. So we're a few minutes over this morning. Apologize for that. We did start a few minutes late, so hope everybody is enjoying this study. We'll continue this study next week. And if anybody has any questions or comments, I know it's a little bit hard since we're not gathered together, but feel free to catch me during services or after services if you have any questions or comments. So thank you for your time this morning.